The 21st plenary meeting of the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly is currently debating the resolution necessity of ending the economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed by the United States against Cuba. Authorities in Jamaica, Haiti, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic ordered the immediate evacuation of thousands of people ahead of the arrival of Category 5 Hurricane Melissa. And during the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Summit in Malaysia, the Chinese government expands the free trade agreement in response to the rise in protectionism from the United States. Hello, welcome from the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We'll begin with the news. And on Tuesday morning, the 21st plenary meeting of the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly is currently debating the resolution necessity of ending the economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed by the United States against Cuba. Several representatives of the international community reiterated their rejection of the blockade, which has been characterized as a violation of international law and the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Since 1992, the UN has consecutively approved resolutions calling for an end to the blockade. This is the 34th time Cuba has presented such a resolution to the international organization. However, the United States rejected these claims, intensifying the economic oppression on the island. The resolution will be put to a vote by UN member states on Wednesday, October 29th. In this scenario, and on behalf of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the representative of Singapore, Burhan Ghafor, urged the United States to lift the blockade against Cuba and to remove the island from the list of countries that sponsor terrorism.
I join other members of this Assembly in reiterating our call for the United States to lift its unilateral economic, commercial, and financial embargo against Cuba as soon as possible, and to delist Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism.
And for his part, the permanent representative for Barbados to the UN on behalf of the Caribbean community, CARICOM, Francois Jackman, also offers statements regarding Cuba's situation in the face of the U.S. blockade.
The unilateral economic, commercial, and financial embargo imposed by the United States of America against the Republic of Cuba remains a clear violation of the UN Charter and international law. For more than 3 decades, the General Assembly, guided by the Charter, has spoken with clarity and consistency. This embargo must end. CARICOM therefore deeply regrets that despite the near universal calls of the international community, the embargo continues.
The Chinese government urged the United States to stop its attempts to undermine peace and stability in the Caribbean region. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Guo Yakun said he was aware of the statement by the Caribbean community CARICOM in which former leaders reiterated their anti-war position and confirmed their concern about the United States military deployment against Venezuela. The Chinese spokesperson also urged Washington to abandon its warfare and intentions to destabilize the Caribbean region and to seek to return to the path of judicial cooperation. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro announced a precautionary suspension of the energy and gas agreement signed with Trinidad and Tobago and called it a risk to the regional security. The statement was made after the government of Trinidad and Tobago issued a report announcing joint military drills with the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. The Venezuelan president said he will submit the decision to the Council of State, the Supreme Court of Justice, and the National Assembly for recommendations to take more in-depth measures on the issue very soon. President Maduro also said the suspension of the agreement was the only alternative left after Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister's decision to turn her country into a U.S. aircraft carrier against Venezuela and South America. And in Brazil, the defense team for former President Jair Bolsonaro filed an appeal on Monday against his 27-year prison sentence for attempting a coup d'etat, losing the 2022 elections. Found guilty in September of attempting to prevent the inauguration of President Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva, Bolsonaro's team stated that they seek to correct ambiguities, omissions, contradictions, and uncertainties in the Supreme Court's decision. Bolsonaro was convicted of 5 crimes: attempted coup d'etat, attempted abolition of the democratic rule of law, membership in a criminal organization, damage to public property, and damage to protected property. In the sentencing, Judge Moraes emphasized that Bolsonaro sought the perpetuation of his political group in power regardless of democratic and republican norms. And Russia described as alarming the possible deployment of French troops to Ukraine and their possible intention to escalate the conflict in the territory. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov expressed concern over data from Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service indicating that France would be sending about 2,000 soldiers to the Ukrainian front. Peskov also assured that Russian troops have reported the presence of foreign military personnel in radio communications on the line of contact. Russia and Ukraine were in negotiations which are now on hold due to Kiev's unwillingness and continued demands for military and financial support from the West. Let's go back live to the UN headquarters to continue to listen to the statements of the different representatives on the day that they are debating on the resolution on the necessity to eliminate the U.S. blockade against Cuba.
Defends the just cause of Cuba and its righteous struggle to put an end to this criminal blockade. The Cuban people is a noble people, a hard-working people driven by solidarity, and a peace-loving people. The blockade, slander, and international pressure stop Cuba from fully exercising their right to sustainable development. Moreover, these create conditions that facilitate the systematic violation of the human rights of the Cuban people. The United States of America must provide economic reparations to the Cuban people for all of the damage wrought by its unilateral measures. That damage has been done to the tune of billions of American dollars. President, we call for the immediate and unconditional lifting of the blockade against Cuba. Bolivia staunchly supports the General Assembly's draft resolution to end the economic, financial, and commercial embargo imposed by the United States of America against Cuba. To vote for Cuba is to vote for the culture of life and against the industry of death. To vote for Cuba is to vote for the right of all nations to build their own destiny. Cuba is not alone because the solidarity of peoples is stronger than any blockade, and the blockade will not prevail. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the
Statements at the UN General Assembly of the representative of Bolivia to the United Nations also joining in this call for support to Cuba and saying that they would vote yes on the resolution on the necessity to eliminate the U.S. blockade against Cuba. Let's now take our first break. Remember, you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English. We'll find news, different formats, news updates, and much more. I'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's return to the UN General Assembly live.
That has far-reaching consequences, the weight of which is borne by the Cuban people and felt acutely in their everyday lives. These unilateral measures undermine the foundational principles of sovereignty, non-intervention and non-interference, as well as the maintenance of friendly relations among states, all of which are prerequisites for global peace and security of our civilized society. As such, St. Vincent and the Grenadines remains deeply concerned about their continued application. As a small state whose existence is dependent on the equal application of and adherence to international law, we firmly believe that in our most tense moments, international law must serve as our guiding compass. though it may be inconvenient at times or appears at odds with national interests. It is in these critical moments that we must defer to international law, as it is the foundation that enables our peaceful coexistence. Excellencies, in today's world, where trust is increasingly scarce, tensions are high, and diplomacy is fracturing, we must commit to being constructive. We are at a critical juncture where multilateralism is no longer being deferred to as our first port of call, and the legal frameworks that underpin our global order are under strain. Yet, St. Vincent and the Grenadines remains hopeful that good sense and principled engagement will prevail. It is in this hopeful spirit that we renew our call for the unconditional lifting of the embargo against Cuba as a first step to creating the conditions conducive for engagement between our two friends. We urge both parties to engage constructively to prevent a further deterioration of the situation. As a good friend of both the United States of America and Cuba, St. Vincent and the Grenadines urges a mature conversation between them to resolve this long-standing 20th century impasse. St. Vincent and the Grenadines will continue to stand in solidarity with Cuba and its people on this vital issue, and will support any genuine efforts that could foster a path towards progress. We underscore that dialogue rooted in mutual respect and understanding and undertaken without preconditions remains the only viable path towards a durable and amicable resolution of this long-standing issue. I thank you, and I wish you all peace profound.
I thank the distinguished representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Equatorial Guinea.
I will continue, as we were saying, listening to the statements as the UN General Assembly is debating on the resolution, the necessity to remove the U.S. blockade against Cuba. We were just listening to the permanent representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to the UN, also joining in the calls of support for Cuba and calling for an end to these unilateral coercive measures that has impacted the Cuban people and its development for over 6 decades. Let's now continue with From the South with more news. And Hurricane Melissa burst down on the Caribbean region without making any landfall yet, leaving 9 people dead so far in the region and 13 injured. In Jamaica, 3 people were reported dead, while Haiti has registered 5 deaths and 1 casualty was accounted for in the Dominican Republic. The Category 5 storm is currently fewer than 64 kilometers from landfall in Kingston and is expected to make contact on Tuesday afternoon and across southeastern Cuba on Wednesday morning, with maximum sustained winds near 280 kilometers per hour. According to the U.S. National Hurricane Center, by moving very slowly or remaining almost stationary, it can bring continuous torrential rains, increasing the danger of flash floods and landslides. Melissa will be the most powerful hurricane to hit the region since Hurricane Gilbert in 1988 and threatens to cause extensive damage to infrastructure. And Melissa has prompted the evacuation of over 650,000 citizens in the eastern part of Cuba as it nears the island as a potentially devastating Category 5 hurricane. The Cuban Civil Defense General Staff declared the eastern provinces of Guantánamo, Santiago de Cuba, Holguín, Granma, Las Tunas, and Camagüey on alarm phase, while Ciego de Ávila, Santi Espíritus were put in alert phase as the weather event's path is closely monitored. In this context, Cuban authorities have instructed the evacuation of over 650,000 citizens in flood-prone areas across the forecast-affected provinces, urging the population to stay informed about the advances and development of the hurricane and to comply with the civil defense instructions. And the Mexican government provided economic support of approximately $1,000 to more than 70,000 heads of households as part of their response strategy following the heavy rainfall caused by a tropical disturbance. During the regular meeting with President Claudia Sheinbaum, Welfare Secretary Ariadna Montiel reported on the progress of the census to support those affected, which covered 103,245 houses in 119 municipalities in the affected areas. The extraordinary rains, which were recorded between October 7th and the 11th, severely impacted the states of Veracruz, Puebla, Hidalgo, Querétaro, and San Luis Potosí. In addition to the 80 confirmed deaths, authorities are still searching for 19 people reported missing. And in India, authorities ordered the evacuation of thousands of people from low-lying coastal areas ahead of the arrival of Cyclone Montha. The Weather Service issued red alerts for 19 districts following forecasts of heavy rainfall and winds of between 90 and 110 kilometers per hour as it moves towards the eastern coast of the country. The government reported that disaster response teams evacuated approximately 38,000 people to relief camps in the state of Andhra Pradesh and 32,000 in the state of Odisha. Experts say that storms are becoming more frequent in South Asia, mainly due to global warming, which makes them more extreme and unpredictable. On Tuesday, 3 Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces during an attack on the occupied West Bank city of Jenin. Israeli occupation forces stormed the town of Karfkud, west of Jenin, with military reinforcements surrounded a site on one of the village's agricultural lands and fired live ammunition at 3 young men. The General Authority of Civil Affairs informed the Ministry of Health that bodies of the murdered have been seized, adding that Israeli occupation forces shelled a vehicle in the same location, setting it on fire and setting several olive trees ablaze. In this context, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement condemned the assassination, calling it part of a continued pattern of criminal aggression against the occupied West Bank, and warning that the occupation's military escalation reflects the regime's deepening brutality and disregard for Palestinian lives. An Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appeared in Tel Aviv District Court to continue his testimony in the ongoing corruption trial against him. On Tuesday, district court judges approved Netanyahu's request to shorten his testimony. The Israeli Prime Minister is the first incumbent leader to testify as a defendant in a criminal trial in the country. Netanyahu must respond during his appearances before the court to charges of fraud, breach of trust, and accepting bribes in 3 separate cases. In September 2025, the court decided to increase the number of weekly hearings to expedite the process due to the repeated delays in the trial, which began in 2020. And during the summit of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations held in Malaysia, the Chinese government is expanding the free trade agreement in response to the rising protectionism from the United States. During the final day of the Asian Summit in Kuala Lumpur, Chinese Premier Li Qian and the regional bloc's chair, Malaysian Premier Anwar Ibrahim, oversaw the China-ASEAN Free Trade Area 3.0 upgrade protocol. The pact establishes a combined market of over 2 billion people, in addition to reducing tariffs on goods and increasing the flow of services and investments. The deepening of the trade conflict between China and the United States risks weakening global economic growth, while awaiting the meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump in South Korea on Thursday. And in this context, Chinese Prime Minister Li Qian highlighted the importance of cooperation as a means to overcome the current global economic uncertainties.
Pursuing confrontation instead of solidarity brings no benefit, which will only allow external forces to divide and manipulate us. The more complex and severe the situation is, the most we must stay united and strengthen ourselves by relying on each other and coordinating our acts. We can safeguard our legitimate rights and interests.
And the 2025 General Assembly of the China-Africa Agricultural Science and Technology Innovation Alliance kicked off on Monday in Ethiopia with a focus on cooperation for Africa's food security and agricultural modernization. President of the African Academy of Sciences, Liz Colston, said China's journey in agricultural modernization provides invaluable experience to Africa. Colston added that China exemplifies mastery in high-yield, technology-driven agriculture, feeding nearly 20% of the global population with less than 9% of the world's arable land. Meanwhile, Africa faces food insecurity despite being home to 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land. Head of the Chinese mission to the African Union, Jian Feng, said China stands ready to share its experience in agricultural development and rural poverty reduction with Africa to achieve common development. Like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. So join us on social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm Mr. Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.